We're going to cover the Mongols through a video lecture to just get through the material. So background on the Mongols is that they are going to come from the steppes in Central Asia. So if you look on the maps, it's kind of this like reddish territory that is featured there. They are nomadic. They are going to try and find the resources they need through trade. So this is actually going to be something that's very, very important to understand for the Mongols, because as they go in and take over a region, they are going to stress the importance of trade and make sure that trade routes at the time are protected and secure. And anybody who kind of challenges that is going to face harsh punishment. They are known for using horses for their traveling purposes, and they're organized into clans. So this is going to be very important, very similar to how you'd seen in the Arabian Peninsula, how there were Bedouins. The Mongols are also going to be in constant competition with one another. The elder men are typically going to lead these clans. They are typically based on kinship as well. But it's very, very common for women to be kidnapped in the clans, and this is going to lead into a lot of disputes and in violence between the different Mongol groups as well. They are going to be animistic, so that again is the worship of spirits, and we talked about that a little bit with Africa, but the spirits are going to be specifically tied to the Mongolian region, so to their homeland. This is also going to be important in understanding the Mongols, because as they expand and take over other regions, they do not force these regions to adopt their religion, because they recognize that it's kind of central to their homeland. And so that's going to, again, kind of focus on this tolerance, which you don't often see with the Mongols or hear about with them. They are going to use yurts, which are movable tents, and you actually see that there are modern day yurts being used as well. They are going to allow them to settle in different regions as they, again, kind of track their resources that they need. The Mongols are more egalitarian than other societies, and basically what that means is that they are going to have more equality for women than men. Women can actually make, or not more women than men. They are going to be able to make decisions and kind of be treated equally. So other civilizations and cultures that we've talked about are patriarchies, and the Mongols are as well, but the rights that women have are typically limited in these other regions. And we don't see that necessarily with the Mongols. Women are going to have rights and be represented well in society, in Mongolian society. So Genghis Khan is going to be the more known of the Mongolian clans. He was born, Temujin was his name. He had a very rough upbringing. His mother is going to be kidnapped. You're also going to see some aggressive conflict with his brothers. He gets married. His wife gets kidnapped. So there's kind of this constant conflict that was, again, found within Mongolian clans, but he is kind of pushed into or ushered into this kind of culture that way. So in 1206, he is going to unite all of the Mongolian clans together. And he's able to do this because of his use of force, his strategies, and really just his competence. And so he is going to be renamed Genghis Khan, which means universal ruler, and implement some changes for the Mongols. So they are all going to be, the men in the military are going to be organized into different groups. So you'll start out with a group of 10,000. Within that, you have a group of 1,000 that are kind of the leaders, 100 out of that ultimately. So we kind of see this structural organization within the Mongolian clans under Genghis's rule that you'd not seen previously. He is known for tricking his enemies. So typically what they would do is when they would go fight their enemies, the enemies would think, oh, it's just a small group of Mongols. And so the enemies may think that they're being successful, and so the Mongols start retreating. But the retreat is actually going to be where there are additional groups of people waiting for them. And so when they ultimately go in and try and follow the Mongols, thinking that it's just a small group that are fleeing, what they're then going to be contending with is a larger force that is ready to fight. And then he's also known for his cruelty. So it's kind of one of those surrender or be killed, basically. And so he's kind of known for that very harsh punishment. So a lot of people, when the Mongols would come in, would surrender to them. However, with his death, we see that the empire is going to be divided into 4 khanates, and kind of be split among his successors and his sons as they move through history. So this is an iconic image of Genghis Khan because you actually see in Mongolia today that there's this huge statue, even though he's known for kind of like pillaging and attacking these various villages and civilizations, and really kind of hurting cultures and destroying artifacts. He's represented pretty well in this. So the empire is going to be divided into the four khanates that you can see on this map. So it's a little harder to see, but you can see the Great Khan here, which is going to be the control of China and parts of Southeast Asia. One of the things to note is that they are not going to have Japan. So we'll get into that a little bit later. The Sagatai, which is going to be Central Asia. So on the map, it's this orange right here. And then you have the Ilkhanate, which is this purple, which was the Persian region. So they're going to take over there. And then you also have the Golden Horde, which is in Russia. And we've briefly kind of talked about Mongol control in Russia. So again, they do have mixed treatments. We have different perspectives from individuals. In Baghdad, where we had seen kind of the Abbasid Caliphate, in 1258, the Mongols are actually going to go in and like kind of destroy the city because they refuse to surrender. And so they go in and basically destroy the irrigation, the canals, and this leaves a lasting impact on the region, really kind of disrupts the trade there as well. But then they're also known for promoting tolerance. So in Russia, where they are going to kind of move in, the Russians still are allowed to practice their own religion. They just basically are paying tribute to the Mongols for years. So there are stories that talk about the brutality of the Mongols, but there's also stories that kind of talk about how they were tolerant and how they were peaceful. And what we actually see is this era known as Pax Mongolica, which sounds like Pax Romana, which is known for Mongol peace. And this stems from the concepts that they are going to like protect these trade routes, and specifically the Silk Roads. That's going to be huge for the Mongols. The Silk Roads had kind of fallen into disuse, but under the Mongol rule, you actually see the protection of that trade. While there's good things that can come out of that, you also are going to see that there are bad things. So the spread of disease kind of runs rampant, and the Mongols are attributed to having helped to spread the bubonic plague or the Black Death. So the Yuan Dynasty is going to be in China. Kublai Khan, which is the grandson of Genghis Khan, is going to set up shop here. And one of the things that was a little bit different for Kublai Khan is that he is not going to leave. Many of the Mongol khans or the universal rulers or the rulers are going to actually go back to their homeland and stay. So they'll set up, establish kind of a government system, and then they'll leave. He stays and remains in China. He rebuilds or creates this new capital in Beijing, builds this palace, but there's kind of some contradictory nature here. So while China is going to be open to greater trade and cultural diffusion, again, bringing back those Silk Roads, you also see that they are unwilling to allow the Chinese to hold major government positions. They can still hold the low-level government positions, but they actually employ Persians to come in and rule China. And this is going to lead to a lot of resentment and hostility for the Chinese, which will ultimately kind of lead into the Chinese unifying and overthrowing the Mongols later. But what we do see as well is this cultural diffusion that exists. And so Marco Polo, who was this merchant from Venice, he and his father are actually going to be invited to the court and encouraged to stay. And so Marco Polo stays under Kublai Khan's court and documents all of this information about the great things that the Chinese had, and specifically under Mongolian rule. So he writes the travels of Marco Polo, and again, all of this is under hit like while he was living with the Mongols. And so he goes back and actually gets arrested. And so while he is in prison, he's detailing all of this information, and that's where it kind of gets compiled into the travels. And people don't actually believe him. Initially, they're like, oh, well, this, some of this has to be exaggerated, but it was all true. And again, kind of documented the prosperity that existed in China during this time. But we do know that the Mongols attempted to conquer the Japanese on several different occasions and were not successful. This actually leads to this, like, the idea of the kamikaze, the strong winds, because ultimately, as the Mongols were trying to conquer the Japanese on their last venture, they are kind of turned aside because of weather conditions. And so this is going to lead to the Japanese kind of using that kamikaze as the strong winds to discuss their ability to succeed. So the end of Mongol rule in China, and then kind of overall, ultimately the Mongols continued to have this drastic spending that led to the depletion of the treasury. And so without money for the government to spend, we see this increased taxation, which leads to resentment. And so eventually the Chinese, again, will band together and overthrow the Mongols. It does take some time to do that, but they are capable and able to do that. They kind of maintain a presence in Central Asia in different parts of it. But with the Ilkhanites, you will see that they eventually get overthrown. And for what happens in that region is more so that the Mongols convert. And so they argue that many of the Mongols, because they convert to Islam throughout the Middle East and adopt many of the Middle Eastern ways, they marry with individuals in that region. They claim that they just kind of like faded into the background there. And you will see that there will be somebody that claims descent from the Mongols that comes after and reconquers some of these territories. They do maintain the presence in the Golden Horde or Russia the longest, but again, it's like tributary state. And so we eventually see that Ivan is able to overthrow Mongol rule when he says he's no longer paying that tribute. But we also know that they led to the spread of the plague and the bubonic plague. They do claim that the Mongols actually catapulted dead bodies that had been infected with the plague. And so they were the first to use biological warfare in their attacks, whether or not that's really true. But the historians do have some evidence of that. All right, so that is the end of the lecture. Hopefully you have all of the information you need to move forward. Please let us know if you have any questions.